on behalf of the Woodstock Conservation Commission for this informative presentation regarding the proposed Eversource's resiliency project for the town of Woodstock. Beth, you're presenting for us? Jean?
Yes.
Okay, Beth, okay. So I guess without further ado, here's Beth Bernard to
Thanks.
give us our presentation, and then we'll be available to take questions afterwards.
Thanks, Lee. I'm Beth Bernard. I'm a member of the Woodstock Conservation Commission. Let's have some introductions. If any other members of the Conservation Commission want to introduce yourselves, this is a good time.
I'm Jean Pillow. I'm with the Woodstock Conservation Commission.
I'm Crystal Adams. I'm with Woodstock Conservation Commission.
I'm Lori Barefoot with the Woodstock Conservation Commission.
Woodstock.
Awesome. I think that may be all of us tonight. And I see that there's some folks from Eversource online. So if you're able and you hear us, feel free to introduce yourselves.
Good evening. My name is Sean Redding. I'm the manager of vegetation management for Eversource.
Hi everyone, my name is Jenna Turner. I'm a supervisor with vegetation management with Eversource and have been overseeing the resiliency work going on statewide.
Thanks, Jenna.
I'm Susan Scott, and I'm an arborist for Eversource.
Hi, I'm Sabrina Janakopoulos, and I'm an arborist with Eversource.
Good evening. My name is Teresa Jackman. I'm a community relations and economic development specialist for Eversource.
Good evening. I'm Adam D'Agostino, arborist for Eversource.
All right, was that it? We had a nice group. Thank you all for attending tonight. I'll make this fairly brief, but to the point, hopefully. And as we said, you know, if you have any questions, you could feel free to put them in the chat during the presentation, or after the presentation, there'll be some time for questions. So we just want to make sure that all the folks in Woodstock know all the details about Eversource's resiliency project. I'm sorry, that's an old date. That was our last presentation. And so I'm going to show you some slides that were actually shared with us by Eversource on August 22nd. They joined us for one of our Conservation Commission meetings. And so this project is, they're calling the Resiliency Project. It's basically to, I guess treat might be the right word, or cut about 20 miles of roadway statewide in 13 different communities, Woodstock being one of those communities. And it involves removing hazardous and non-hazardous trees on private property and on public right-of-way in those towns. So this is a map that Eversource, or illustration that Eversource shared with us. So previously, there was about a 10-foot zone on each side of the power line that they were looking out for. This resiliency project is taking into account that 10-foot on either side of the poles, but also increasing it to include that fall zone, which looks to be about 30 feet on either side, basically whatever can fall on that power line. And Eversource is saying, you know, that by expanding the clearance around the lines, they want to help insulate our power from storms. So this is the scorecard that Eversource did share with us. Of note, about 61% of our outages here in Woodstock are tree related. So specifically, the work that's in this resiliency project is going to include it. Cutting trees along the power line path that are taller than 30 feet. Cutting trees that are expected to grow taller than 30 feet, so they might not be now, but they could be later. Cutting trees that are 30 or more feet distant from the power line, so it could include trees that are up to 80 feet and that have the right criteria to be cut. And also replacing some of the cut trees with native or non-native shrubs that will not exceed 30 feet in height at maturity. And so there's 3 different sections in this town that they are wanting to do this project in. The first is Child Road. It's a 1.25 mile segment on Child Road. And here's a map that they shared with us. And a second segment is Summers Turnpike Route 171. So there's 2, it's actually a bit of a longer section, goes from Rocky Hill Road West. And then this section here is from Rocky Hill Road to the South Woodstock intersection there on 171. You have some
Beth, did you get the map I sent you from 169? We just got it today.
Yeah, it's in the slides, but before that, Jean, I have your photos from 171 if you want to share anything about your thoughts about that section.
Yes, this is Route 171, and at this point, we're looking towards East Quasit Road. These are images I took off of Google Earth. And Millbrook is very close to 171 here. And I did some measurements and I also went out there and looked at it. It's less than 50 feet from the road. And if trees, I mean, what does that say, 30 feet? If the trees were taken down on either side of Millbrook that could fall on those power lines, it would leave the stream bank totally exposed to erosion, solar exposure, and it would not be good for healthy streams. And that's a very big concern. There's a large section of Millbrook that is this close to the road, as well as Taylor Brook and Mastercraft Brook at different crossings.
Taylor Swift tickets myself recently to no avail. So next time I'm calling you.
Taylor Swift tickets. So this is a great photo of that brook that Jean was mentioning that winds along and under 171 in that route that's slated to be cut. And as well as here's the Taylor Brook near Rocky Hill Road, gives that winery its name, but also a very important ecological resource in our town, especially for our watershed. So the last section that we did just receive, I just received this map today, so I haven't really taken a long time to look at it, but the last section is 169 from South Woodstock towards Pomfret. So kind of starting down by the fairgrounds and headed towards all the schools in Pomfret. Of note in that section is that beautiful tree by Coco's, the old Coco shop. I know that closed. I'm not sure what it is now, which is actually on a historic registry list of trees in the state of Connecticut.
It's a Connecticut notable tree.
Thank you. Thank you, Jean. Here's another map just of that section, the Route 169 section here. So what does this all mean? These 3 roadways have been kind of determined as roadways that Eversource wants to do this resiliency project on. And I will mention that they have said that this is a trial. So if it goes well in our town, they want to do this in many other towns. So what this means is that they will be contacting property owners. And asking whether it's okay to cut the trees that are not in the town right of way, excuse me. So anything that's on your property that's not on the right of way, they do have to ask permission. So they will be, as far as I know, they will be leaving hangers on the door, knocking on doors as well if you're home, and looking for that response from private landowners. So some pros and cons to this. I know, you know, at least in my house, door tags are easily overlooked. We don't all use our front doors. They do have a 10-day window for consent. And if there's any folks from Eversource here, I'm not 100% sure what happens at the end of that 10-day window. If you don't get back to them, you know, right away. So that'd be great feedback to hear after the presentation. We were also concerned about, you know, what about land trust land or people who don't have structures? They have said that they're going to track down owners for properties that don't have structures on them. So that was good. And then for trees with private property, they cannot just default to doing the work without the property owner's written consent. And so if you do own property in Woodstock, it's important to know that you have the option to say yes or no to this happening on your property. So we all know, obviously, we all need power. It's an inconvenience when we have outages. And as a member of the Conservation Commission and someone who lives in Woodstock, I do recognize the importance of a strong power grid in our town. The reason that we want folks to know about this project in Woodstock, however, is that this is more than routine vegetation management that we're used to. And it's going to have a lot more of an effect on many, many aspects of our town and our lives. So here's just a picture of some cutting in Bethel. And this is a couple sections in Newtown that have been done as part of this resiliency project. As you can see, it does look a lot like a clear cut. You know, all the trees are down in those areas. I wasn't in that specific area, but it does seem like from who we've talked to that where this in other towns where this has happened, it's definitely clear cut type of cutting. Concerns of the Conservation Commission, one is that resiliency is not a quick fix. When we talk about resiliency, we're talking about our ability to adapt to changing circumstances, right? So whether we're talking about climate change, we're talking about our power grid. However, clear cutting sections of trees is more like a quick fix and less like a long-term solution. I know our Conservation Commission hasn't really heard any type of, you know, long-term solution from Eversource about these issues. A good example of a program in the state that promotes resiliency is the Stormwise program. They've done some demonstration sites around Connecticut, and it's through UConn and the Ag Experiment Station. They've done roadside trimming based on a balance between maintenance of the roadsides, electricity, utilities, and the people who live there. As we all know, finding that type of balance is a bit more difficult, and it takes a bit more time than just cutting, you know, 30, 40, 50, 60 feet from a power line. So that's definitely a concern. And some questions for you all to consider. If you have property that's in these areas that will be cut, is it worth it? So is it worth having increased exposure on your home? either sun or wind, right? So you might have increased heating or cooling costs when you get those trees taken down. Is the loss of scenic character on our roadways worth it? I know my husband and I moved to Woodstock partly because, I mean, we love the woods, but also it's just so beautiful. We drive to work and we drive through all the tree-lined streets. It's a big part of our, you know, the aesthetic benefits of living in this town, as well as a reason why people live here. Is it worth the non-native and invasive plants along our roadways? I drive around this town a lot. For example, Rocky Hill Road, I drive that almost every day. And the Japanese knotweed is just taking over. It's not good for wildlife. It's not good for people. And it's just really a nuisance. And when we open up areas, due to, with clear cutting, there's no shade. That is prime soil for invasives to pop right up, and they will. That also will change important wildlife habitat. I showed a picture of a deer. We don't think about this often because we live in such a wooded area. The deer can kind of spread out, but when we cut along the roadways like this and we make these sunny patches next to the road, it's actually going to attract more deer and other animals to the roadways, because there's going to be different types of plants, berry and seed producing plants that you don't find deep in the woods. And so we're going to get more deer by the roads, and we're going to get more, unfortunately, more interaction with deer on the roads, which I know is something we all try to avoid. Like Jean mentioned, threats to watershed health. This is Taylor Brook right here. Part of the reason that this is such a healthy brook is because those trees are on the edge of it. It provides sun. It reduces the amount of runoff into the brook, and this brook is very close to the road. The health of this watershed right here in our town, the one that goes right behind the winery, the water, all that, that will really be negatively affected by this cutting. And also, finally, ironically, this is going to reduce our town's climate resiliency. So not just with our homes for hot, if we take the trees from around our homes, we're more likely to have more sun and more heat in our homes, but even as wind blocks and things like that, trees act as the sponges in our watersheds. So if we take trees away, there's going to be more erosion. A little changes in our watershed, in our environment in town are going to make a big difference. And I don't want to miss that Eversource is planning to replace some trees. So part of this project is planting trees in areas that have been cut that specifically don't grow taller than 30 feet. And the idea is, they can't knock a power line over, right? Or they can't get in the way of the power line. So they have provided this list of trees. Some of these are native. I see a witch hazel here, great. Others are not native, and some even border on invasive. So again, we have that same problem. We want to avoid taking down trees that actually support wildlife in our ecosystem and adding trees that don't support our ecosystem and wildlife. So an interesting thing also for property owners to consider, Eversource will plant the trees, which is great, but the watering, weeding, and care for those trees is the responsibility of the property owners. as someone who's worked in forestry, I know if you don't tend your trees, then likely they're not going to make it up to 10, 20, 30 feet, right? We have deer, we have on our roadways, you know, it's not always the best environment for our, especially for our native trees, but for many trees to grow in. So, you know, they'll need to be tended to by this property owners so that they can grow. It's unfortunate. We've been hearing from other towns where this is happening. The resiliency project is happening, that sites that are being replanted are seeing invasive plants take over and the saplings get shaded out by the invasives, which is, you know, we have a big problem with invasives in the state. The reason they're invasives is because they grow fast and they grow in the worst soil conditions, and they can easily take over, you know, a dogwood sapling, a witch hazel sapling, that kind of thing. So it's definitely going to require some work on the landowner part to manage that. This is the project timeline we were originally given in August. I have a big question mark about this because I haven't heard back in terms of where Eversource is on that timeline. So I would love them to hear from them at the end of this presentation about that. So just a couple things to think about. This is, in my view, a costly Band-Aid to fix a larger problem. We know we have power outage issues in Woodstock. Most of us, if we're lucky enough to be able to, we have a generator. But there, you know, this project also does not address the 40% of power outages that are not caused by trees, right? So if we can address that first before really affecting the town in many negative ways, I think that would be a great idea. Like I was saying, this is seems like a quick fix project and not a truly resiliency. It's just short-term solution for power loss. And although, you know, talking with Eversource representatives, talking with arborists, et cetera, from Eversource is a really great step. I think this really could be much more of a collaborative effort. And importantly, you know, there's been no environmental impact statement done, you know, on those stretches. You know, for example, the watershed parts of it, you know, at least on our Route 171 are very concerning in our town, because that's a very important part of our town and our watershed health. So it's all of our turn to act, so we can respond to Eversource when we get a notice. We can meet with the Eversource arborist, you know, and determine which trees that they can share, which trees they feel should be cut. We can ask questions and we can say yes or no. Contacting our selectmen and our representatives about our concerns. We definitely encourage that. Spreading the word to your neighbors, because obviously, you know, there's a lot of us and not everybody was able to make it to these two meetings. Feel free to attend a Conservation Commission meeting and let us know how this project is affecting your property as well. We're planning to stay in touch with Eversource while this is all happening. And just a reminder that it is our choice whether we want this to happen on our private property. So asking a lot of questions is a good thing. It's okay to say yes if you want Eversource to cut a tree. However, we need to know all the information, right? Why are we cutting it? Is there another alternative? Can I be present when the work is happening? what's going to happen after the project. What are you planting and why, right? We want to have a say in what's planted on our property as well. What contractors will be using, et cetera. So, you know, working with Eversource, and also we need to make sure we have all the information and that we make an educated choice. Take notes, ask questions, et cetera. So thank you. Excuse my sore throat tonight. I just want to, I think there's some questions in the chat, but I do want to open this up to Eversource. If anybody from Eversource could share with us the timeline that you have for this working in this town.
Thank you for inviting us and having us on to address your questions and concerns. Jenna Turner, the supervisor, is going to provide an updated timeline, because obviously the timeline that was presented last summer was not met. Jenna?
Thanks, Sean. Can everyone hear me? Okay, great. I have a brand new computer and I was having a little technical problem, so I'm just gonna stay on audio. So the timeline is, right now, we have started the permissions process. We are going out, meeting with property owners. If they're not home, leaving door hangers, and are in various stages of permissioning. The Child Road segment is about 50% permissioned, meaning we've met with about half of the homeowners. Summers Turnpike is only about, I'd say, 5–10% permissioned, and Route 169 is about 75% permissioned. So we have not started any tree crews on this work yet, and we're still in that process of working together with the property owners as well as the state DOT. So we have not put any tree crews on the work yet.
Great, thank you, Jenna. And when you say permissioned, do you mean like that? For example, you said 75% permissioned for Route 169. Do you mean that 75% of the property owners have been contacted, or 75% have said yes? Like, what does that mean?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, it's a great clarifying question. When I say that, I mean that we've met with them. So that does not reflect the amount of consent. So we might have mixed in there people that have consented to the work we requested, also some that modified. They might allow some work with modifications, et cetera. So that's the number of people that we have received responses from on a property basis for each of the segments.
Hi, this is Jean Pillow from the Conservation Commission. I'm disappointed that today was the first day we saw the target area for Route 169, because we did go through a tremendous effort to do mailings to all the property owners in the project area that we knew about, to let them know firsthand from us that we were having this meeting, and we were neglected the opportunity to present an alternate viewpoint to those people. So the timing of your notification to us is lagging and very disappointing. Route 169 is a national scenic byway, and it is my hope that it will not just be, let's clear all these trees, because we have to preserve power, because we also need to preserve the integrity of the national scenic byway, the characteristics that helped get that designation included the mature trees lining the roadway. And so that would be something that would be lost to us for generations if there was aggressive tree cutting along Route 169. So those are a couple of my comments. Thank you.
Yeah, and just to add to that, we are going to be presenting the information to the state DOT. So there will be quite some time before we start any work on that segment. So there is multiple steps added in there along Route 169.
I will just mention on that, that a few people noted the American elm at Coco's Cottage, which is along that line. It's a designated Connecticut notable tree. Where was it? There was a comment from Dawn saying the elm in front of the former Coco's Cottage should be left alone at all costs, not as only is it iconic in our town. From my understanding, it's one of a dwindling species of tree and should be protected. That's very true. Dawn, thank you. And I'll also just address some of these questions in the feed. Jason's asking who selects what the replacement trees and shrubs are. I'm going to let Eversource answer that.
Sure, thank you. So it depends on where the tree that was approved for removal is. So if it's on private property, that's a discussion with the private property owner, taking into account the site conditions as well as what the purpose of the vegetation that to be planted that they are seeking, whether it be for screening, for habitat, for flowers, for whatever it may be. So that's a discussion with the property owner who ultimately gets the decision, as long as it's compatible, meaning it's not going to be a tall growing species that's going to, in future years, recreate the situation that exists now, a tree that can fail and strike the power lines. When it's a tree within the town road right away, then it involves the tree warden and the town to decide what can be planted there. And then on the state roadway, it's the DOT that would make that ultimate decision of what is acceptable to be replanted in the state road right away.
Thanks. And along that line as well, Jason asked, can property owners designate another party to make the choice? i.e., could I designate the Conservation Commission to select trees, shrubs?
Absolutely. You know, that's the property owner's decision. The poster that you showed earlier is a collection of tree species that were selected by horticulturists from the University of Massachusetts and from Georgia, Dr. Michael Durr, who's a famous horticulturist. And it was with the thought of trees that were compatible, under 30 feet tall at mature height, that could be planted adjacent to the power lines, as well as trees that are underutilized in the urban and roadside planting. And some of them are also what I'd call stretch trees. This area and further north into Massachusetts and New Hampshire, this might be a stretch for them as far as their frost hardiness and zone compatibility. With the recognition of climate change, that could be causing trees to shift north. So some of those are selected for specific purposes. And the selection of trees to be planted is not limited to that. That's just some recommendations that have been created for us to communicate to customers and to the landscape industry.
Well,
Yeah. And
great. Thank you.
oh, go ahead, Jason.
Yeah, no, well, so thank you for the answer. So rather than me have to learn what the good, quote, good trees / bad trees are, I for one probably just want to say, I'm gonna have, I'm just gonna designate that the Conservation Commission could pick the trees, sign, you could deal with that rather than me have to start. I have enough things to learn.
May
So-
I comment?
You were cutting in and out, Jason, but I just heard that you were gonna have the Conservation Commission weigh in on your trees.
I would just appreciate the ability to do that, is all I'm saying.
Okay.
So thank you for the answer. The long way of saying thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
May I say something? Again, this is Jean Pillow again. First of all, for anybody who lives in any of these target areas, if you have a dead, dying, or diseased tree, this is a great opportunity to have that tree removed, and it won't be at your expense. And I know how expensive it is to have a tree removed. But my question for Eversource is, what will you do in these riparian areas of our cold water streams that we have in town? We have healthy streams in town. We're part of a drinking water watershed. We need to preserve the integrity of the riparian areas along these streams. And this whole target area along Route 171 that abuts Millbrook, it's unacceptable for having those trees clear cut and replaced with something else. And the property belongs to a land trust. So what is your approach to deal with those sensitive areas?
The first would be reaching out to the land trust in the case you mentioned, discussing with whoever is an authority to make decisions for the land trust, whether that be a director or a board or whatever, however the land trust is set up. And there's many different setups for different land trusts. And it'd be discussion with them around which trees we are requesting to be removed on the land trust private property, if you will. And then taking into account, the wetlands and water shed area. It would be using techniques to not disturb or overturn soil. If there is stump grinding that is applied, we do not go below surface. And so those root systems are still intact for many years until they rot. If you've ever had a tree cut down, you know that stump can last many, many years and still has the soil integrity benefits that a tree does. And then appropriate planting around there, taking into account the soil conditions around any waterway or wetland.
I think it's fair to say that the amount of soil erosion that could happen even with the stumps left and it replanted after 1 to 5 years is way less. Would you, than a 40, 50, 60-year-old forest?
Yeah, there's different aspects that occur when any tree is lost in that type of area. You'll get the immediate deflection of water off of any leaves if they're present, any branches, the absorption of a large tree is greater than that of a small tree. That is all true.
Yeah. Another one of my watershed concerns is that, and a lot of times people don't consider this, but the leaves that fall in the stream actually give nutrients to the water. So yeah, it's great steps, I think, to keep the root masses in the ground, etc. But there's a lot more that's lost. I want to make sure we get all our questions on the chat. Sue is asking, is the use of Roundup part of the long-term plan to limit regrowth?
Our typical herbicide application is to a live tree that is removed, a hardwood species, using a cut stump treatment. And so that is spraying after the tree is cut, immediately after, using a chemical by the commercial name of Pathfinder to apply to the stump. And the purpose of that is to reduce the amount of regrowth from the stump or from the root system that from all the stored energy in the roots. It's a systemic that goes into the vegetation and then kills the root system to prevent the resprouting. There's different levels of effectiveness based on time of year, health of the tree, the root system that's there, as well as timing. All of our herbicide is applied by licensed applicators within the state of Connecticut with EPA approved and state listed herbicides, and then all label instructions are followed.
Thank you. Another question, did Eversource provide for any recourse if they don't make good on the second half of the project? So what if they don't plant trees they promise or remove the wood they cut? I am seeing people having to call over and over just to get wood cleared after basic trimming.
So the part of the discussion during the outreach to the property owner is to find out what their, if you will, the disposition, of their, how they want the wood. It is their tree, so they have first right of refusal. So if they want the wood, we will leave it there for them, in a safe location, away from the road. If they do not, then we are required by state statute to remove those logs and all debris. All small branches and limbs are typically chipped up on the same day or the next day, using a chipper to haul away the wood chips. Those wood chips are also available not only to the property owners, but to anybody in town. If they would like them, we dump them by the truckload, which I liken to the size of a Volkswagen Beetle, for those who remember those. So that is available to anyone. But if the logs are not wanted by the property owner, typically it's a few weeks before we can schedule to pick them up. We need enough of them to fill a log truck, especially in a project like this where there are several properties in a row. That shouldn't be an issue with picking up the wood. The second part is, as Jenna mentioned, the timing of this. The intention is to have all of the work set up, meaning property owners discussed or met with, shown which trees on private property we wish to remove. And I just wanted to clarify something. The trees on private property, we cannot do anything without the consent of the property owner, unless it is that tree has a long enough branch that is in contact or shows sign of burning with the conductor. So until we get consent, no work is done. For the trees and the public road right-of-ways, and that's both town and DOT, the state statute and the regulatory requirement is to get documented notification, which is initials or signature, a text message, an email, or certified first-class mail. And that is the location, or I mean, those are the trees that have the 10-day requirement. That being said, we are not doing any of that work until we have all of this work lined up. And the second part of that is specifically for the trees in the town road right-of-way where we're hanging it. We are required to obtain a permit from the tree warden, who may, if we are seeking removal, either decide that the tree in public safety stance is a hazard tree and may approve the removal, or may go through a posting process where the tree is posted for 10 days and anybody can make a comment to that tree warden. And then a hearing is held at an appropriate time and place with interested parties notified. Public comment and input is provided and the tree warden makes the decision. And then that there is an appeals process for that posting and hearing process, which would go to PURA if the property owner who that tree is in front of, whose house that tree is in front of, or the utility does not agree with the decision of the tree warden. So there's the trees on private property, we must get consent, but the tree in front of your house, we also have to get documented notification and a permit from the tree warden. And so the plan is to set up all that work so we can work from beginning to end through the whole process. So the timing of obtaining all that consent, getting the permit, going through a hearing if there is one, and then performing the work will then dictate when the replanting is done if that was agreed upon. Obviously, in the height of summer, that's not the best time to plant. So we usually target springtime or fall to plant, because that's the optimal time, or the better time to plant, and we see better success and survival of what is installed.
Another next question from Stan. There's 29 people on here. How can you speak for the rest of the town? We certainly aren't speaking for the town. I'm speaking tonight on behalf of the Woodstock Conservation Commission. And, you know, one of our messages is that everybody here can make their own choice. We just ask that you know all the facts before you make a choice. Replacing trees this is from Rebecca. Replacing trees has been mentioned, but is Eversource also willing to replace trees with shrubs or ground cover that will decrease erosion?
Yes, and again, that's a discussion with the property owner based on the impact to the property. It's a case-by-case basis to determine if planting is appropriate, and then a discussion will occur with what they want. And the customers that we deal with across the state have all sorts of different objectives for their landscape. And we've done hydroseeding of grass, hydroseeding of wildflowers. We planted shrubs, perennials, trees, deciduous, evergreen. And the option may even be to plant further into the property for a taller growing tree. So that is also open. It doesn't necessarily have to be in the spot where the tree was removed.
All right, and that ties into a later question. Can people pick and choose each tree? And so yes.
Mhm.
Answer to that.
Beth, this is Crystal. I
Yeah,
have
go
two
for it.
questions that came in as a direct message, not to everyone.
Okay.
So I'd like to get those answered. For this person, what subcontractor are they using to do the cutting? And then another question that came in directly was about just trimming the tops of the trees.
So the first one, currently the contractor that is involved with this project is Tenant Tree, who's a Connecticut-based business. They are doing their outreach specialist is doing the primary contact with the property owners. And then the three arborists that are on here are covering the different segments. And I know that's a little confusing, but we work electrically based on the circuit, and some of these circuits come from different people's areas. So it's the arborist's responsibility to ensure that the tree work is being done safely and properly, adhering to all federal, state, and local laws and ordinances. And making sure that the contractors are doing what they are intended to do. The second question was,
Oh, Crystal,
Oh, sorry. Can you hear me now?
yes.
Okay, the second question was about just trimming the tops of the trees instead of clear cutting.
So we follow ANSI A300 pruning standards, which are American National Standards Institute. And so we avoid topping trees. It's damaging to the tree. And what happens when you top a tree, it vigorously resprouts and regrows, and those branches or suckers or water sprouts are weakly attached. And they, the trees that we are targeting are tall growing, your oaks and your maples and your white pines. They are genetically driven to grow the height that they are. And so they will resprout and regrow again, or they will not survive the cutting if too much of the foliage or too much damage to the tree is inflicted. Then they will not survive, and then you have a standing snag, which could be a safety issue. So that is not a practice that we employ.
Stan, will you need to go to the Wetlands Agency for permission to do trimming in the riparian zone?
There's no requirement for us to do that.
So it's up to all of us to make sure that you all know that there's a riparian area where you're cutting.
Mhm.
Yes, and we need to make sure we're loud about that. Lee's asking, Sean, is there a plan in place to address the other 40% of power outage causes? That's a great question. Oh, and then Maura, sorry, I missed yours, Maura. Go ahead.
Oh, so yes, part of this focused work is based on data, outages, history, outage information that's occurred over the last several years, looking at those areas that have the greatest impact and the potential for improvement. So we have 16,800 miles of overhead lines in Connecticut for the roadside. As you mentioned, we're targeting 20 in this program. So this is a very small subset that have had issues. And an evaluation of these, it is the trees that are driving the majority of the outages. The number that you presented earlier is 60%, and that's day to day. 60% of the outages are caused by trees, but during storms, that number jumps up to 90% of the outages. If you were here during the snowstorm and Irene of 2011, Sandy, and then ECS, almost all of the damage was caused by trees. Some of those other issues that we continually evaluate and address are, vehicle accidents. So when a car hits a pole, that is a long and lengthy outage. That's very hard to eliminate because our poles are near the road. Some of the outages occur from animals, specifically squirrels are the biggest outage cause for animals, occasionally a bird. And so we go through and we do specific animal guards around the transformers. Those are the metal pots that you see on top of your pole, and around the fuses. And then also our equipment. We are constantly evaluating trends of equipment that is not performing properly and doing maintenance as well as repair and or replacement of those. So we are constantly across our system looking at those different outage trends and then addressing those as they come up and as we can schedule them and get them implemented.
Thank you. Maura asks, in regards to decisions about tree or shrub species by landowners, does Eversource put it in writing so there's no confusion or changing of decisions?
That's correct. So we won't proceed with any planting until we get a signed agreement stating what is going to be planted, specifically with species size and then timing of it. And so that sometimes is a delay if there are a decision can't be made, but it will be in writing what is to be planted.
Awesome, thanks. And Joseph asked if this was noted as a pilot project, and if successful, this program will be expanded. Does this also mean that more tree removal will be planned for Woodstock? What's the determination for success? That's a great question.
So this is not a pilot. This is an ongoing program that has been reconfigured, where we were previously going along all of our miles of maintenance of overhead lines, the 16,800, and picking out individual trees to remove. Because of the ever increasing demand and of reliable power and our performance of our system during major storms, this is a reimagined focus of that tree removal program that we've had for almost a decade now, where we are focusing and concentrating the removals to have a greater impact and reduce the risk of tree outages both day to day and then during storms, because that is the major cause during storms is trees.
Thank you. Jason asked, is there any different chemical other than Pathfinder for wetland areas, stream areas, given it leaches into groundwater and is toxic to fish per the EPA?
Right, and so we'd be following label directions, so there is a distance that that it won't be applied within the buffer for that wetland. So any trees there would not be treated.
What's your buffer?
I'd have to follow up with that. I don't recall off the top of my head.
Okay, and that runs into Maura's question. Do you have best management practices when cutting a wetland to reduce impacts? We did discuss this a bit in terms of leaving stumps in. Do you have anything else?
Yeah, so it's also the impact from equipment and or people. Much of our work is done from an aerial lift, a cherry picker, some people call it. So the vehicle is not in the wetland. And so they're reaching in and then, cutting the branches and then removing the debris either by hand or, for larger logs. If appropriate and needed, we may use appropriate matting to enter the wetland so soil disturbance does not occur. I think
Beth,
on
you're
mute.
muted. Beth, unmute.
Sorry. The questions keep coming, Sean, so I'm gonna keep keep asking. Paul is asking, when is the proposed start date for cutting? I think that hasn't been set yet, correct?
That's correct. That's dependent on our progress of obtaining consent and going through the permit process with the tree warden.
Could
And
you
then
give us a
review-
ballpark?
So we may not do all of have all the segments complete when work is started. So as mentioned, one of them is 75% complete. If that reaches closer to 100%, we may start on that one because it does take time to perform the work and remove the logs. So it's already mid-January. So we're probably looking end of February as a tentative potential start date. But that
For
really depends.
the Route 169, I think that was a 75%, right?
Correct. And the one that is a lower percentage, the gentleman said 5 to 10%. Obviously, there's quite a bit of work that needs to be done there as far as outreach and obtaining consent. So that could be later in the year.
He asked, does Eversource plan to do an environmental impact study to completely understand the far-reaching impact of this project?
There is no intent to do an environmental impact study and no requirement to.
Jean's asking, can a property owner allow some trees to be removed but refuse to allow other healthy trees to remain?
On an individual's property, they have the full decision what happens to those trees. So if they say yes to some and no to others, that's their choice, and there is no recourse for us to eject or appeal or get that overturned. So they have full say of what happens on their property when the tree's wholly on private property.
Great, thank you. My question that I've been sitting on for a few minutes is, as we know and we deal with all the time, we're having more and more extreme weather events, which are causing these outages, right? They're causing these storms that cause these outages. As we all know, these extreme weather events are linked to climate change. Trees are an integral part of climate resilience. So the more trees we have, the more carbon is sequestered in those trees. So big picture, what is Eversource's thought about as we remove more trees from the roadway and we don't let them regenerate to soak up more carbon from the atmosphere? What is Eversource's plan to balance that out in terms of the effect on climate change in our carbon cycle?
So luckily, our state is a well-forested state, 60% forested, and we're the 5th most tree covered, canopy covered by U.S. Forest Service analysis. And we're a carbon sink by NASA and NOAA's evaluation. So while there is impact from removing trees, that has to be balanced with the needs of our customers and businesses and the economy of Connecticut. Electricity is required. So it is a trade-off between keeping the power on, not only day to day, but during major storms, and then that impact. There is, as you mentioned, probably more of an impact to that site if a tree is removed. It does change it. There's different sun exposure and water exposure. But it is an area that is needed to keep the power on, to focus on doing these tree removals. Add to that the not only environmental factors of these more constant and frequent and impactful storms, but also the invasive insects and diseases that are impacting our trees and our roadside forests. Just in the last few years, in the last decade, we've had emerald ash borer, which is leading towards almost all the ash to die unless they're treated annually. When we had a drought period, we had gypsy moth infestation that led to thousands of oak tree deaths. And now there is beech leaf disease that is believed to be brought on by a nematode carrying something, they're still figuring it out, that is impacting beech trees. And all of those are some of our native trees. So, and then you add to it the storm damage and the cycles of heavy rain and drought. Our roadside forest is just impacted over and over again, and it's a cumulative effect.
Yeah.
So it's not an issue.
I
that is-
do agree, Sean, that our forests are definitely in trouble. In Connecticut, although we are over 60% forested, we're also a leader. We are acting, and we should continue to act as leaders in climate resiliency, which means we do need to have no net loss of forests. And so my question was about, if we're losing forests in one area, how does Eversource going to speak to perhaps reforesting different areas, reducing greenhouse gas emissions in other ways to balance that out?
The primary loss of forest land is from development, not from tree work or forestry operations. So it's really, thoughtful development and good management of our roadside forest by all the parties, so that the forest is healthy and resilient. That is the best measure that we can have. And that's part of what the Yukon research has focused on, is that roadside forest, how to manage that in a different way than we have been for the last century.
Yeah, I agree with you on the Yukon project. It's hard to have a resilient forest if it's not there. However, thank you for your response. I know there's a lot of other questions, so we're going to move on. Senator Jeff Gordon, thanks for joining us, Senator Gordon. His comment was, my apologies for being late. This may have already been presented already. Are there specific detailed plans, maps, timetables, permit applications needed or submitted? Route 169 is a designated scenic byway. Any state agency approvals needed or already obtained?
So that process is ongoing. Because we need to get the consent on trees on private property and documented notification of trees in front of people's house in the state roadway or in the town road right away. That's an ongoing process. We typically, on these types of projects, will wait until we've gotten the vast majority of the information identified, meaning consent and documented notification, and a plan for which trees we will be seeking to be removed. And then specific to the scenic byway, that information will be sent to the scenic road DOT committee that oversees those for review and discussion. But none of that has been submitted as of yet, as we are still cataloging all the trees and surveying and talking to property owners.
I keep muting myself here. Lori's asking when are replacement trees or shrubs planted. We have had feedback that another town that is part of this project is still waiting for replacement planting. And I believe you did mention, Sean, that you preferred planting times are fall and spring, correct?
That's correct. And so it also depends on when the work is actually done. We don't plant before the tree work is done, because oftentimes the newly planted vegetation could be damaged while the tree work is in operation. And sometimes, depending on the impact to a particular person's property, it may be difficult for them to envision what it's going to look like afterwards. And so sometimes there is a different strategy for replanting after the work is done. then, before the tree work is completed. So we typically do the replanting plan after the work is done, so they can see what it's going to look like.
Paul is wondering, how do I get some delivered from my own firewood use? Paul, I think if this is on your property, then you can tell Eversource to leave it for you, but I don't know about if it's not on your property. Lori's saying, do I understand correctly that if a private homeowner does not respond to your hang tag and you can't connect with them, you will not cut trees on your property, on their property?
That's correct.
And Lee's question, if 100% of landowners don't approve the tree cutting, isn't it likely that the beneficial reduction in power outages may be far less than the projected 60%? Would it still be cost effective with only a partial culling?
So unless all the trees are removed, and I don't believe that will happen with all the property owners. We're hoping for high acceptance and understanding. And so any work that is done out there reduces the risk. Day to day, a hazard tree, which is a tree with a disease or defect or structural problem or site issue, is more likely to fall day to day. But in those major storms, we can see any type of tree fail, or it may have defects that are internal that are not visible from inspection. So it is the ultimate plan is to reduce, if not eliminate, the risk from trees.
All right. Did I miss anybody's questions here, or does anybody else have any?
There's one from another person named Jean. It says resiliency is providing battery backup to homeowners so that they're not only dependent on Eversource. That would be a lot cheaper for Eversource with far less environmental impact. Consider alternatives.
So those types of very questions are being reviewed in several different dockets by PURA. What is the best solution or alternate solutions? Most of batteries or generators are what we call beyond the meter. So you have the line going to your house and then our meter. That's where our responsibility ends, and anything beyond that is the homeowner's responsibility at this time.
We got one from Senator Gordon. Which specific state and local agencies are needed to be contacted and from which to get approvals? That's question one, and then he's got another one after that.
Sure. So for the town road right of way, that is under the care and control of the tree warden of Woodstock. We would submit in writing a permit for our planned work, what we are intending to do. And then that tree warden evaluates it and follows the state statute for tree warden review. On the DOT property, DOT road right of ways, it's similar, but that is going to the DOT for submission of what we are requesting for tree work. Any trees that are greater than 18 inches are also reported to the town. Any trees greater than 18 inches in the state road right away that are approved for removal, also the town is also informed of those. And then for the scenic byway, that is a submission to that scenic roadway committee for review and determination of what gets done.
Jeff's wondering, will the public property owners be notified? Hey, Crystal, is this being recorded? This is, right? Yeah.
Yes, this is being
So,
recorded.
Senator Gordon, we will send you a recording of this so you can get all the deets, but yes, property owners will be notified, and they do have to consent in writing to having trees cut on their property. He appreciates Eversource looking to improve and protect energy distribution infrastructure, but want transparency in the process. I will second that transparency part. And we just want to have a good, we want to have a good back and forth with Eversource. I do want to just say thank you for the folks at Eversource who did come tonight. Although it may not always seem like it, we really do appreciate Eversource, especially when our power goes out, right? Everyone says that. However, our town, the scenic, the historical, the ecological aspects of our town are very important to many of us, as well as the economic aspects of our town. We're glad that you could be here to hear concerns and hear our thoughts, and we'll move forward, working with you and continue sharing those concerns and thoughts with you in the future.
Great, and thank you for having us.
Mhm. Yeah, thank you. And if people have questions, who should they contact from Eversource going forward?
Are these individuals that we're trying to reach, or just anybody in the town or public?
Yeah, I get the public, anyone on this webinar, anybody who listens afterwards
Sure.
with questions.
So they can always call our customer service line. And then we also have a direct email into our department. It's cttree, all one word, @eversource.com.
And is that specifically for the resilience project?
It's for any veg management, any tree, any question around trees or vegetation.
Okay.
Can somebody put that email address into the chat so we can capture it?
Thank you, Jenna. Thank you. All right, thanks all. Hope you all have a good night.
Thank you.
Thank you, Beth.
Thanks.
Thank you very much. Good night.
Beth, thank you
Thank
very
you.
much for doing your presentation, and Eversource, thank you for being here, and for the members of the public, thank you. Have a good night.
A great presentation, Beth. I'll see you guys
Thanks,
next week.
All right, see you later.